Hello and welcome back to Sleeping Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered through the shadows of Sleeping Noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. Tuesday nights in Seattle usually feel the same to me. Gray sky, cold air, and that tired, heavy silence that settles over the streets once the evening rush is gone. That night, I had worked late at the store again. The kind of shift where your feet hurt and your brain keeps replaying the same few tasks like a broken loop. By the time I clocked out, the parking lot was mostly empty, with only a few cars scattered under the tall yellow lights. I remember thinking about nothing in particular as I walked to my car. I just wanted to get home, eat something quick, and fall into bed. The air smelled wet, like it always does after a light Seattle drizzle. I unlocked the driver's door, tossed my bag in the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. That simple pause you do when you're drained, when you're trying to collect yourself before you drive. I pulled out and headed toward home, taking the same route I always took. The streets were quiet. A few cars went the other way, their headlights sliding across the dark pavement, then disappearing. Most of the storefronts were closed. Traffic lights changed for nobody. It should have been peaceful. Halfway home, I glanced into my rearview mirror, and something felt off before I even understood what I was seeing. There was a white car behind me. Not unusual on its own, but my gut tightened because I realized it had been behind me for a while. Not close enough to be aggressive, not far enough to be casual, just there, steady and quiet, like it had settled into my shadow. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe it was just a person going the same way. Seattle has plenty of roads that funnel people toward the same neighborhoods. Still, I kept checking the mirror. The white car stayed the same distance, matching my speed perfectly. I made my first test move without even thinking too hard about it. I turned right onto a side street I didn't need, the kind of random right turn you do when you're trying to prove to yourself you're being paranoid. The white car turned right immediately after me, smooth as if it had expected it. My mouth went dry. I told myself it still could be nothing. Maybe that was the best way for them too. But my chest felt tighter now, and my fingers held the steering wheel harder than they needed to. I drove on and took another turn, this time left. It followed. No hesitation, no pause to pretend. It was like the driver was connected to my decisions by an invisible wire. My heart started beating in that loud way you can feel in your throat. The streets around us were mostly dark, lined with parked cars and sleeping houses, a few porch lights, a few windows glowing faintly from televisions. But there weren't many moving cars, and that made the white car feel even more present, like there was nothing else on the road to dilute the fear. I sped up a little, not enough to be reckless, just enough to see what would happen. The white car sped up too, staying at that same careful distance behind me. The more I tested it, the more it matched me, like it was waiting for something. Then it happened. The car behind me started flashing its high beams. At first, I thought it was an accident, one quick bright flare. But it wasn't. Flash, flash, flash. Over and over, harsh bursts of white light, filling my rearview mirror and turning the inside of my car into a strobe-lit box. It was so constant that it stopped feeling like a signal and started feeling like an attack. My first thought was anger. Who does that? Who blinds someone at night? Then the anger turned into something hotter and more dangerous. Fear. I imagined a drunk driver messing with me, or someone who wanted me to pull over. Maybe they wanted to rob me. Maybe they wanted to drag me out and do worse. The empty streets suddenly felt like they had teeth. I refused to stop. I didn't pull into a lot. I didn't slow down. I kept driving toward home because home was the only place that felt like it could still mean safety. The flashing continued, and it didn't fade after a minute like a normal impatient driver would. It kept going for what felt like forever, but later I realized it was around 10 minutes straight. The kind of 10 minutes that stretches and warps. Every second feels like a full minute when you're trapped in your own fear. Between the bursts of light in those brief pockets when the high beams went off, I could see the driver's shape more clearly, and that's when it got even stranger. He wasn't leaning forward with road rage. He wasn't throwing his hands up or honking in anger. He was moving in a panicked way, like he was yelling. He kept pointing toward my car, toward me, toward something inside my car. At one point, when the glare eased for just a second, I caught a glimpse of his face in the dimness, and I remember thinking he looked terrified. Not furious, terrified. That didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse because I couldn't understand why he would be terrified while chasing me. What could he possibly see that I couldn't? I drove the last stretch to my neighborhood, with my stomach knotted so tight it hurt. The familiar streets didn't comfort me the way they normally did. The trees felt taller, the shadows between houses felt deeper, even the streetlights felt weak. When I finally reached my block, I made a sharp turn into my driveway, almost too fast, the tires rolling over the edge of the curb with a dull bump. I thought if I could get into the driveway and get inside, I could lock the door and call the police and figure it out from there. The white car followed me in and stopped right behind my car, blocking me in. The engine stayed on. Its headlights poured into my back window. For a split second, I just sat there, frozen, hands still on the wheel, mind blank except for one thought. This is it. This is where something happens. The driver's door of the white car flew open, and a man jumped out fast. Not casually, not like someone who wants to talk. He moved like there was a fire behind him. He ran toward my driver's side, yelling something I couldn't understand at first. Then I heard the words clearly, and they didn't match what I expected at all. Get out of the car now. Lock the doors and run. I stared at him, confused and scared. He looked wild, like he'd been holding his breath for 10 minutes. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't swaggering. His eyes were wide. His face was tight with panic. I didn't move. My instincts told me he was trying to trick me, to make me step out so he could grab me. I stayed locked inside, my hand hovering near my phone, my mind jumping between choices. He slammed his palm against the air, like he was trying to shove the words into me. Look in the back seat, he shouted, his voice rough like he'd been screaming too long. Look in the back seat right now. A cold wave moved through me, starting at my neck and sliding down my spine. Slowly, with my pulse thudding in my ears, I turned my head and looked over my shoulder into the back seat. At first I saw nothing, just darkness, the outline of the headrests, the faint reflection of the streetlight outside. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized the darkness wasn't empty. There was a man back there. He was extremely thin, like his body had been carved down to the sharpest angles. He wore black clothing that blended into the shadows. He was huddled low in the corner, crouched under the window line like he had practiced being invisible. His face was partly hidden, but I saw enough to know he was watching me with a flat, patient focus. In his hand was a long knife. My mind refused to accept it at first. It didn't feel real. It felt like a trick of my eyes. But the metal caught a faint bit of light and confirmed it. He was holding it tight, and his wrist was already turning, already lifting the blade slowly, carefully toward the back of my neck. It was like watching something happen in slow motion and knowing you can't stop it fast enough. I made a sound I don't remember choosing to make, a strangled gasp. My body finally moved on pure instinct. I shoved the door handle, pushed the door open, and launched myself out of the seat like the car had turned into a burning room. I heard fabric tear, and a sharp sting hit the back of my shoulder as the knife grazed me. ripping my shirt. If I had been a second slower, it would have been my skin, my throat, something that never heals. I stumbled onto the driveway and almost fell. The stranger from the white car grabbed my arm and yanked me away from the open door, not gently, but with the desperate strength of someone pulling a person off train tracks. "Go," he shouted, and I didn't argue. I ran toward my front porch with my legs shaking so badly I thought they might fold. Behind me I heard movement, quick and light. I turned just enough to see the thin man sliding out of the passenger side door, low and fast like an animal. He didn't come after me. He didn't try to fight. He disappeared into the dark stretch of trees near my house, slipping into the woods like a shadow being swallowed by a bigger shadow. I made it inside and slammed the door, locking it so hard my fingers hurt. The stranger stayed outside, shouting that he was calling the police. I fumbled for my own phone and called too, my voice stumbling over words. I couldn't stop shaking. My whole body felt like it had been plugged into an outlet. The police arrived quickly, the neighborhood filling with the sound of sirens and radios and doors slamming. Flashlights swept across my yard, across the tree line. K9 units came, dogs pulling against their handlers, noses low, trying to catch a trail that might already be gone. I told the officers what happened, and it sounded impossible even as I said it out loud. A man in my back seat, a knife, a stranger who followed me and flashed his lights to save me. It sounded like an urban legend, the kind you hear as a kid and laugh off. But my torn shirt was real. My scraped skin was real. One of the officers searched my car while another stood with me at the curb. When the officer came back, his expression had changed. He told me they hadn't found the man, but they had found signs that made the story even worse. Under the back seat, tucked in places you don't normally look, there was a blanket. There were food scraps, crumpled wrappers, little bits of dirt. The officer said it looked like someone had been using my car as a hiding spot. Not for an hour. Not for one night. For days. For days, the words landed inside me like stones. I pictured myself driving to work, singing along to the radio, tapping my fingers on the wheel, stopping at red lights, sitting in traffic, all while a person was hidden inches from me, breathing quietly, listening, waiting. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept seeing the knife rising in the dark. I kept hearing the stranger's voice yelling for me to look in the back seat. Over and over, my brain replayed the moment my life almost ended in my own driveway. After that, my car didn't feel like my car anymore. It felt contaminated, like it had been turned into a place for someone else. I checked the back seat every time I got in. I checked the floor. I checked the trunk. I checked under the seats with my phone flashlight like I was searching for a bomb. I told myself it was over, that the police had been called, that the man had fled, that he wouldn't come back. The only thing that still felt safe was my house. Home was supposed to be solid. Walls, locks, familiar sounds, my wife's things in the bathroom, our photos, our routine. It was the one place where I could breathe. Weeks passed. Slowly, the panic faded into something duller. I went back to work. I drove again, though I hated it. My wife went to visit her family for a bit, and I stayed behind because I couldn't get time off. Being alone wasn't unusual for us, and I thought I could handle it. One night, I came home late, tired again, and as soon as I stepped through the front door, I stopped. The smell was wrong. It wasn't the normal mix of laundry detergent and cooking oil and the faint scent of our candles. It smelled like cheap cigarettes, stale and bitter, like someone had been smoking in a closed room. I don't smoke. My wife doesn't smoke. None of our friends smoke inside. I stood there in the entryway with my keys in my hand, listening. The house sounded normal, quiet. No footsteps, no voices. Just the low hum of the fridge, the soft ticking of the hallway clock. I checked the doors and windows the way you do when you're unsettled. Front door locked, back door locked, windows latched. Everything looked fine. That should have calmed me down, but it didn't. It made me feel stupid, like I was being scared by a smell. Then I heard it, so faint I almost missed it. A small click coming from below, from the direction of the basement. Not a loud bang, not a crash, just a soft, controlled click, like someone pressing a button, like someone changing channels on a TV, like someone trying to do something quietly. My throat tightened. I walked toward the basement door slowly, trying not to make noise. My senses suddenly sharp. The door was closed. Like always, I leaned in and pressed my ear against the wood. Breathing. Heavy, slow breathing, close enough that I could hear the wetness in it. Someone was on the other side of that door. My hands went cold. Every logical thought got crowded out by pure instinct. I stepped back, grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the hall closet, and held it in both hands, the way you see people do in movies. Except this time it wasn't a movie and my arms felt too weak to be useful. I kicked the basement door open. The basement was pitch black, darker than it should have been. I reached in and flicked the light switch. For a split second, the bulb came on, and I saw the staircase, the concrete floor, the old washing machine, boxes stacked against the wall. Then the light went dead instantly, like someone had snapped it with their fingers. I stood there, bat raised, breath caught in my chest. In the brief flash, I'd seen enough to know the bulb was gone, not burned out, gone. Like someone had unscrewed it on purpose. A cold breeze slid past me from below, carrying that cigarette smell stronger now. My skin prickled. I heard a quick shuffle, a faint rush of movement that told me I wasn't alone in the dark. There's a small emergency exit in the basement that leads to the backyard. We rarely used it. It was the kind of door you forget about because it's hidden behind storage and old stuff. I moved down the stairs carefully, one step at a time, my foot finding each edge. The darkness felt thick, like it had weight. When I reached the bottom, I could see a faint rectangle of outdoor light at the far end. The emergency door was wide open. I ran for it, bat still in my hands, and burst into the backyard, scanning the trees and the fence line. I saw a shape moving fast, just a shadow slipping behind the trees, disappearing into the night the same way the man near my car had. I chased for a few seconds, then stopped because I realized how stupid it was to run blindly into darkness after someone who wanted to stay hidden. I went back inside and locked every door. Then I searched the basement with my phone flashlight, sweeping it across corners and behind boxes. The beam shook because my hands wouldn't stop trembling. My mind kept insisting I'd find nothing, that I'd imagined it, that I was letting trauma turn my home into a haunted house. But I found something. Behind the old washing machine, tucked into the tight space between the wall and the appliance, was a small mattress. Not a proper bed, but something thin and worn, like it had been dragged in and flattened down. Next to it were empty food cans. Some were the exact brands I had in my kitchen. I recognized them immediately, and that recognition was worse than the fear because it meant whoever had been down here had been eating my food, living off me quietly. Then I found a notebook. It was small, cheap, the kind you'd buy at a corner store. The pages were filled with handwriting, neat, careful, almost obsessive. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I read a few lines, and my stomach dropped. It was a timeline of my life. 8 a.m., leaves for work. 5 p.m., returns home. 11 p.m., goes to sleep. There were notes in the margins that made my skin go cold. Today, he forgot to lock the bathroom window. I went in and sat with him in the living room while he watched the movie. I was so close I could smell his hair. He didn't notice me behind the couch. I stood there in the basement, breathing through my mouth, trying not to throw up. My house hadn't been empty when I thought it was. My living room hadn't been mine alone. The feeling of being watched suddenly stretched backward across weeks, across months, like I was seeing my own memories through a new, horrifying lens. This person wasn't just stealing. They weren't just breaking in to grab valuables. They were staying. They were living alongside me in the dead corners of my home, watching and learning and enjoying the fact that I didn't know. I called the police again, and when they arrived, they walked through the basement with serious faces and calm voices that didn't match the panic inside me. One officer told me a term I had heard only once before, and only in passing, as if it was something rare and far away. Frogging. People hiding inside a house, sometimes for days or weeks, living in attics, basements, crawl spaces, empty rooms, using food, watching routines, waiting. That night, I didn't stay in my home. I couldn't. I went to a hotel and sat on the edge of the bed with all the lights on, jumping at every sound in the hallway. In the morning, I went back with an officer to check the house again. The basement felt different in daylight. Not less scary, just more real. The officer walked ahead while I followed. My eyes stuck to the floor, expecting to see another sign of someone who didn't belong. That's when I saw the message. Written in chalk on the basement floor, large enough that it couldn't be missed, like it was meant to be found and enjoyed. Thanks for the hospitality. I'll miss your comfortable bed. And the officer kept talking about reports and patrols and changing locks. But my mind was stuck on the word hospitality, like whoever wrote it thought this was a joke between us, a shared secret, like I had been a host without knowing it. I sold the house not long after that, or tried to. I couldn't sit in that living room without picturing someone breathing behind the couch. I couldn't walk down the hallway without thinking about someone watching from a crack in the door. I couldn't sleep without imagining a quiet shape in the corner of the room. I moved into what I thought would be the safest kind of place. A 10th floor apartment in a building that advertised security like it was a luxury product. Cameras everywhere, key fobs, guards at the gate, bright lights in the lobby. Everything clean and modern and controlled. I told myself a person like that couldn't get into a building like this without being seen. That was the whole point. I convinced myself that whatever had followed me had been tied to the car, tied to the house, tied to bad luck and open doors. A high-rise felt like distance from all that, like stepping out of the woods and into bright daylight. For a while, it worked. I started sleeping again. I still checked locks, but the tight feeling in my chest loosened. I got used to the sound of other people living around me, neighbors in the hallway, footsteps above, muffled voices through walls. The building felt alive in a way that made it harder for one person to hide. Then, one night I came home very late from work again. The lobby was quieter than usual. The security desk had someone there, but he was looking down at a screen, not paying much attention. I nodded, kept walking, and tried to focus on normal things, like what I'd eat when I got upstairs. I stepped into the elevator and pressed 10. The doors began to close, and at the last second, a stranger walked in. He wore a long coat. He had a hat pulled low, shadowing most of his face. He stepped into the far corner without rushing, like he belonged there. He didn't look at me. He didn't press any button. The elevator door slid shut, sealing us in together. A small alarm bell rang in my head. I tried to keep my voice calm, like a normal neighbor in a normal building. "Which floor?" I asked. He didn't answer. He kept his head down, hands near the front of his coat, too still. The elevator started up. The numbers lit one by one. I stared at the floor indicator as if watching it could keep me safe. My mouth felt dry. The air inside the elevator felt warmer than it should have, like the space had shrunk. Then, between the 5th and 6th floors, the elevator stopped. Not a gentle stop, like someone pressed the wrong button. A dead stop, abrupt, the kind that makes your stomach drop. The main lights clicked off, and the dim red emergency lights flickered on, bathing the small space in a sick, dark glow. I turned toward the stranger. He started to laugh, low and slow, like he'd been waiting for this moment. That laugh carried a sound that made my blood turn cold, because it wasn't just a laugh. Under it was a whisper, a familiar kind of breathy voice I had heard before, a voice that brought back the darkness of my car and the feeling of someone too close behind me. He reached up and began to take off his hat, slowly, like he wanted me to watch. When his face came into view, my stomach twisted. His skin was scarred, rough and uneven, as if it had been burned long ago. The marks made his expression hard to read, but his eyes were clear, steady, and sharp with intent. He looked at me like he already owned the outcome. "Did you think high-rise apartments would protect you?" he said softly. "I don't need doors to get in. I just need your weakness." I reached for the alarm button. I hit it once, then again, harder. Nothing. The panel didn't respond. No sound. No signal. It was dead, as if it had been cut on purpose. He slipped a thin metal wire from his pocket, holding it in a way that made it obvious what it was for. Not for fixing anything. For choking. For control. For ending a person quietly in a place where screaming doesn't travel well. He stepped toward me in the cramped, red-lit space, and the elevator suddenly felt like a metal coffin hanging in the air. There was nowhere to run, no door to open, no way to create distance. Just a few feet of stale air between me and someone who had prepared this. I raised my hands, trying to keep him back. My mind was a storm of thoughts. Fight, talk, scream, pray, anything. He moved in, and we struggled, our bodies colliding against the elevator wall. My shoulder hit the railing, my elbow slammed into the panel. I tried to grab his wrist to keep the wire away from my throat. His coat scraped against my hands. He was stronger than he looked, or maybe fear just made him feel stronger. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst. The red light flickered again, and in that flicker I saw his face close enough that I could smell him. Not cigarettes, not this time. Something metallic and stale, like a basement. I fought with everything I had. I shoved him back, slammed my weight forward, and for a second he stumbled. The elevator lurched violently, then a sudden jolt that threw both of us off balance. The car shuddered. A grinding sound echoed from above. And then the doors split open slightly. Not fully, just enough. A gap that showed a slice of hallway light, bright and clean compared to the red nightmare behind me. It was like seeing daylight through the lid of a coffin. I didn't think. I dove. I wedged my hands into the opening and forced myself through, tearing my sleeves on the metal edge. I tumbled out onto the 7th floor hallway, scraping my knees. Then scrambled up and ran, yelling for help with a voice that didn't sound like mine. Doors opened. Someone shouted. Footsteps pounded toward me. Within seconds, the building's guards were there, radios crackling, faces alert. One of them asking me what happened while another rushed toward the elevator. I pointed with shaking hands. "He's in there," I kept saying. "He's in there." When they finally did, the elevator was empty. For a moment, my brain couldn't process it. I stared at the vacant space, the red lights still glowing inside, making it look like a scene from a nightmare. The guards checked the corners like the man could somehow fold himself into them. Then one of them looked up. The emergency ceiling hatch was hanging open. The guards searched the stairwells, the halls, the maintenance rooms. Police arrived and took over. They treated it like a serious incident, but I could see doubt trying to creep into their faces the way it always does when a story sounds too impossible. The only reason they didn't dismiss me completely was because the elevator panel had been damaged and the alarm system really had been tampered with. Still, the man was gone. I thought that was the end of it. at least for that night. I sat in the lobby wrapped in a blanket someone had brought down, hands shaking so hard I couldn't hold a cup of water. An officer asked me questions while another spoke to building management. My throat hurt from yelling. My whole body felt bruised. Then, the next morning, the real horror arrived in a form I hadn't expected. The police asked to review the security footage with me. They wanted to trace the man's path, find out how he got in, how he got out. The building had cameras everywhere. That was the promise. That was what I'd paid for. We sat in a small office and watched the screens. On camera, I saw myself in the elevator lobby, late at night, tired, stepping inside. I saw the elevator doors start to close. I saw the stranger slip in at the last second. Then the feed from inside the elevator cut out right when the lights went out, like the camera had been disabled or the power had been interrupted. The officer frowned and fast-forwarded through other angles, trying to find a shot of the hallway outside the elevator doors. We found the moment I fell out onto the 7th floor. We found the guards rushing toward me. We found the cluster of people in the hallway moving in confusion. And then we saw something that made my blood run cold all over again. After I ran out, after the guards reached the elevator, the man dropped down from the ceiling hatch inside the elevator shaft area, moving with practiced confidence. He landed, calm, almost casual, and reached under his long coat. He pulled out a high-visibility security vest. He put it on right there, like it was part of a costume he'd rehearsed. He adjusted it neatly. He stepped into the hallway with the same steady pace you'd expect from staff doing their job. Then he walked down toward the lobby, blending into the confusion. On another camera angle, we saw him downstairs, moving alongside the real guards. He even gestured with his hands, as if directing people, as if helping. He walked right out the front door as the lobby buzzed with activity, as if he belonged there. The final clip made my stomach drop harder than anything else. It showed me outside the building, hunched over on the sidewalk, crying in a way I hadn't even realized was caught on camera. Guards stood around me. Someone spoke into a radio. People moved back and forth. And the man, wearing that vest, walked right past me. He paused for half a second. He placed a hand on my shoulder in what looked like a comforting gesture, like a professional doing crowd control. Then he leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear on the silent footage. But I knew what it was because I remembered the shape of the moment, the slight tilt of his head, the way he stayed too close. I remembered the words because they didn't sound suspicious at all. "Don't worry," he had whispered. "We'll catch him." I didn't recognize him then. Not in the panic, not in the shock, not under the bright lobby lights with people everywhere. My brain had been searching for a monster in the shadows, not a man standing in plain sight wearing a vest. The officer paused the footage and looked at me, and I could see in his eyes that he finally understood what I was dealing with. During the struggle in the elevator, my keys had fallen. At the time, I didn't even notice. But later, when I checked my pocket and my key ring, they weren't there. That meant he had them. Now he had a security uniform, or at least access to one. He knew the building's blind spots. He knew which cameras cut out first. He knew how to move among guards without being questioned. And he had the keys to my apartment. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a myth. He wasn't a story people tell on the internet to scare each other late at night. He was a real person who understood systems, routines, and human weakness better than anyone I had ever met. And somewhere, maybe in the same building, maybe watching from a car across the street, maybe waiting in a hallway with the lights turned low, he was still out there, waiting for the moment the lights go out again. Story 2. I'm going to try to write this as clearly as I can because I'm exhausted and I'm scared that if I don't put it all down tonight, I won't be able to do it tomorrow. I keep rereading what I've typed and thinking it sounds dramatic, like something someone would post to get attention. I wish that was what this was. I wish I could blame it on stress or grief. or my mind filling in gaps because February was hard and I still feel raw. My grandmother died in February. It was a clean, simple death in the way people mean when they're trying to comfort you. But it still left a huge, quiet space behind it, like someone took a piece of the house and the family history and just removed it. At the funeral, my mother handed me a small velvet box. She didn't smile when she gave it to me. She didn't say anything special either, just pressed it into my palm and looked at me for a moment like she was checking my face for something. At the time, I thought it was just grief. My mother doesn't do big displays, and funerals make everyone strange. I didn't think much of the look until later, when I started remembering it too clearly. Inside the box was a ring. It's a thin gold band, worn smooth in spots like it's been held and turned and worried between someone's fingers for decades. The stone is small and dark, not a diamond, not anything I recognize. It's not flashy at all, which is probably why it feels like it belongs to another time. It looks older than my mother, maybe older than my grandmother even, like it was passed down before anyone still alive had a say in it. My mom once said she thought it might be older than the country, and I laughed at her because it sounded like something people say about antiques to make them feel important. Now I don't laugh at anything connected to this ring. There was no note, no little card, no explanation, just the ring. I wasn't surprised she left it to me. I was the only granddaughter who visited regularly in the last few years. The only one who showed up even when it wasn't a holiday, even when she wasn't doing well, even when the conversations were the same stories again and again. I didn't do it for the ring. I did it because she was my grandmother and because I loved her and because I couldn't stand the idea of her waiting for people who weren't coming. But if you're looking at it from the outside, the ring made sense. A family thing passed to the family member who stayed close. I started wearing it the week after the funeral, not because it matched my clothes, not because I wanted anyone to notice. I'm not married, and the ring didn't even go on the usual finger. It fits snugly on my middle finger, and I liked the weight of it there, the little reminder of her whenever I moved my hand. It was comforting in a simple way, like carrying something of hers into the regular days. The first time I woke up without it, I wasn't scared. I was confused. For about 2 minutes, I tried to figure out if I'd just forgotten putting it somewhere. I'm not the kind of person who takes off jewelry in my sleep. I sleep heavy. I don't toss and turn. I don't wake up confused. My nights are usually blank and solid, like a switch turning off and on. I checked the bed. I ran my hand along the sheets, lifted the corners, looked under the pillow even though that didn't make sense. I got down on the floor and checked around the bed frame. Nothing. Then I went to the bathroom and saw it sitting in the soap dish on the counter like someone had placed it there, neatly. The kind of neat that doesn't feel accidental. I stared at it for a while, then picked it up. It was cold, like metal always is, and for a second I had a weird thought that it felt colder than it should have. But I was tired, and grief makes everything feel a little unreal. So I did what a normal person would do. I told myself I must have taken it off when I got up to use the bathroom during the night, and just didn't remember. I put it back on and went to work. The next morning I woke up and the ring was gone again. That's the morning I found it on the kitchen counter next to the kettle. I do not get up to make tea in the night. I don't do midnight snacks. I don't wander. I'm boring that way, and I've always been boring that way. I stood there in my kitchen staring at the ring like it was a dead bug I didn't want to touch. I tried to force my brain to choose the sensible explanation. Sleepwalking. That was the word that made the most sense. People do weird things when they sleep. People drive cars in their sleep sometimes. People eat, people talk, people move furniture. A ring ending up by the kettle wasn't impossible. So I did the sensible next step. I bought a small camera. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a basic little indoor camera you can plug in and angle toward the bed. That afternoon, After work, I positioned it where it could see my whole upper body and my hands if I slept the way I usually sleep. I checked the battery. I checked the timestamp. I made sure it was recording. I told myself I was being smart, that tomorrow I'd wake up with proof that I'd taken it off myself and placed it somewhere without remembering. And then I could make a doctor's appointment and deal with it like an adult. That night, I put the ring on, climbed into bed, and fell asleep fast. The next morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, already feeling tense, and checked my hand. No ring. I didn't even bother searching first. I went straight to the camera footage. The video shows me getting into bed at around 11:18 p.m. It shows me lying still. It shows me in the same position minute after minute. I don't sit up. I don't swing my legs over the side. I don't reach for the ring. I don't move my hand in the way you would if you were pulling something off your finger. At 11 hours, 47 minutes, and 23 seconds p.m., the ring is on my finger. I can see the small dark stone catch a tiny bit of lamplight from earlier, a dull glint. At 11 hours, 47 minutes, and 24 seconds p.m., the ring is gone. There is no moment where my fingers pinch it. There is no sliding motion, no shift. It's simply there in one frame and absent in the next, like the footage skipped something, except it didn't. The timestamp moves forward normally. The rest of the scene stays consistent. My body stays still. I watched those 2 frames over and over until my eyes hurt. I zoomed in until the image got grainy. I watched the pixels like they could confess to something. The ring doesn't fall. It doesn't roll. It doesn't land on the sheets. It just stops being on my hand. I didn't go back to sleep after that. I found the ring that morning on the bathroom counter again. Not in the soap dish this time, but beside it, positioned as if someone had thought about where it looked best. I bought more cameras that day. I can hear how that sounds, like I went from mildly concerned to paranoid in a single jump. But I wasn't feeling dramatic. I was feeling practical. If one camera couldn't catch the movement, then I needed more angles. If it was a glitch, more devices would show it. If it was some kind of trick, I wanted to see the trick. I put one camera in the bathroom, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway facing the living room, one pointed at the front door and the lock. I tested them. I synchronized the timestamps as best as I could. I walked through the apartment and made sure every camera had a clear view of the space it was covering. I went to bed feeling stupid and shaky at the same time, like I was doing something ridiculous, but also like I was doing the only thing that kept me from screaming. The next morning, I woke up, checked my hand, and felt the now familiar cold drop in my stomach. The ring wasn't on my finger. It wasn't on my bedside table either, because I'd left it on my hand. I searched quickly, my mind trying to race ahead of the fear and stay in the problem-solving zone. Then I found it on the doormat by the front door, inside the apartment. Not outside. The deadbolt was still locked. That alone would have been unsettling, but it wasn't what broke something in me. What broke something in me was the footage. Every camera showed the same kind of impossible jump. The bedroom camera shows the ring on my hand at 11 hours, 51 minutes, and 9 seconds p.m. The door camera shows the ring sitting on the doormat at 11 hours, 51 minutes, and 9 seconds p.m. Not 11 hours, 51 minutes, and 10 seconds. Not even 11 hours, 51 minutes, and 11 seconds. The exact same second. Same timestamp. 2 different rooms, no walking, no hand carrying it, no roll across the floor, no blur of motion. I checked the other cameras expecting to see some glitch, some moment where the image stuttered or the timestamp jumped. But they were clean. The hallway camera didn't show the ring passing through. The kitchen camera didn't catch anything. The bathroom camera didn't catch anything. The ring didn't travel through space in any visible way. It was just on my finger, and then it was on the doormat, like reality had decided it didn't have to follow rules. It's hard to explain what that does to your brain. Fear is one thing. Confusion is another. This was like a third feeling, something that made the room feel too sharp and too real. Like my senses were trying to compensate for the fact that my mind couldn't hold what it was seeing. That morning, I called my mother. I didn't tell her about the cameras. I don't know why I held that back. Maybe because it sounded too crazy. Maybe because I wanted to hear what she knew before I made it seem like I'd lost my mind. I just told her the ring kept slipping off at night and asked, as casually as I could, if she knew anything about it. If it had ever done that before. If it was loose on my grandmother. If maybe it needed resizing. My mother went quiet. Not a normal pause. Not the kind where she's thinking of an answer. It was the kind of silence where you can feel someone choosing what to say and what not to say. Finally, she asked, "Did your grandmother ever tell you how she got it?" I told her no. Then she told me something I didn't know. Or maybe something I'd heard once as a kid and never stored properly. My grandmother had a sister. Her sister died young in another state in an apartment fire. My mother said it like she was reading it off a page she didn't want to look at. The ring had belonged to that sister. And then came the part that made me grip my phone so hard my hand cramped. My grandmother, my sweet, stubborn grandmother, had taken the ring from her sister's body before the burial. Not as a keepsake handed to her properly, but taken. My mother didn't use the word stolen, but it sat there anyway, heavy in the air between us. My grandmother wore it for 60 years. My mother told me that once, when my grandmother was drunk on Christmas Eve in the late 90s, she admitted she stopped wearing the ring at night because she didn't like where she found it in the morning. My mother said this very quietly, like if she spoke louder, the words might become real in a way she couldn't handle. Then she said, just as quietly, "I told her not to leave it to you." I think I asked my mother why she hadn't told me sooner, and she said she didn't want to pass on something that sounded like a ghost story. She said my grandmother was dramatic when she drank. She said grief makes people imagine things. She said a lot of small, careful sentences that sounded like someone trying to keep a lid on boiling water. After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen for a long time and stared at the ring. I stopped wearing it that day, not because I thought it was cursed, not exactly, but because I didn't want it on my body while I slept. I didn't want something leaving me without my consent. That felt like a violation, even if it was just jewelry. I started placing it in a different spot each night and documenting where it ended up in the morning. At first, it was just a list in my notes app. Then it became a chart, because once you start measuring something like this, it becomes impossible not to. For 2 weeks, I tracked it. And this is the part that made it worse, because if it had been random, if it had shown up in silly places like the freezer or inside a shoe, I could have forced myself to believe it was some weird sleepwalking habit I hadn't caught. But it wasn't random. It was consistent. The ring was moving. Slowly sometimes, faster other nights. 6 feet on a slow night, 20 feet on a faster one. Always in the same general direction, like it had a destination. I drew a rough map of my apartment and marked each location with a date. The dots formed a line. Not a perfect line, but close enough that it made my stomach turn. The trajectory moved toward the front door. It was as if the ring was learning the layout, finding the simplest route out. I tested it. One night, I placed the ring in the bedroom on the far side from the front entrance. The next morning, it was still closer to the door. Another night, I placed it in the bathroom, tucked behind the toothbrush holder, thinking maybe it would stay put if it was harder to move. In the morning, it was outside the bathroom, down the hall, closer to the door again. Eventually, the trajectory exited my apartment. The first morning, I found it in the building hallway just outside my door, sitting near the baseboard like it had rolled there. But my door was locked. The deadbolt was locked. The chain was latched from the inside. There was no sign of tampering. The next morning, it was in the stairwell. The morning after that, it was in the parking lot. on the concrete near the far end where the light doesn't reach as well. I started waking up earlier just to check faster, as if speed could protect me, as if finding it quickly would stop whatever process was happening. And the direction never changed. Tonight, because I couldn't stop thinking about what my mother said about my grandmother's sister, I finally sat down with a wider map. I looked up the address where the fire happened. I found old records online, a brief mention in a local paper archive. Enough to confirm it wasn't just family exaggeration. Then I extended the line I'd drawn from the ring's movement pattern. The line passed within a mile of that address. The address is more than 1,000 miles away from where I live. I sat at my table with the map open on my laptop, feeling like the air in my apartment had gotten thinner. If the ring kept moving at the rate it had been moving, it would take about 3 years to reach that place. 3 years sounds like a long time until you realize it's counting down, one night at a time, and it doesn't seem to be slowing. That should have been the scariest part. If I'd read this story from someone else, that's where I would have stopped. A ring that moves toward the place a dead person died, like it wants to return. Creepy, unsettling, the kind of thing you tell at a campfire and then laugh off. But that isn't what pushed me into writing this tonight. What pushed me into writing this was what I found when I stopped watching The Ring and started watching The Room. Earlier this evening, I went back through all the footage again, not just the clips where the ring disappears, but full nights. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the map line. Maybe it was the idea of 3 years. Maybe it was just the feeling that I was missing something, that I'd been staring at the wrong part of the frame. I started with last Thursday. The bedroom camera angle is simple. It catches the foot of the bed, the side of my nightstand, most of the floor, and the bedroom door. The door opens into the hallway. In the footage, I'm asleep, motionless, exactly like always. I was about to fast forward when something in the bottom right corner caught my eye. Just behind the bedroom door, at floor level, there is a hand. Not a whole person, not even an arm, just a hand pale against the darker carpet. The fingers are spread out, pressed to the floor like someone is balancing their weight carefully, trying not to make noise. It reaches around the door frame low, careful, as if whoever it belongs to knows exactly how much of themselves the camera can see. It's in the frame for less than half a second. If I had blinked at the wrong time, if I'd been looking at my sleeping face instead of the edge of the door, I would have missed it. I rewound it and watched again. The hand appeared. The fingers flexed slightly. Then it was gone. I felt my whole body go hot, then cold. I sat closer to the screen, holding my breath like that could stop the past from happening. I checked the next night's footage. The hand was there again. This time, it stayed in frame longer, about a full second. It was farther into the room. Not by much, but enough that I could tell it wasn't just a weird shadow or an object. It was placed, intentional, alive, or pretending to be. The next night, it moved again. It has been getting closer every night. I went back and counted carefully, pausing at the exact moment it appeared each time and using the edge of the carpet pattern as a reference point. 9 nights, 9 inches, an inch a night, like someone creeping forward in the simplest, slowest way possible, a pace that would be hard to notice unless you were measuring. I realized something else while I was doing this. The hand never reaches for me. Not yet. It stays low. It stays near the floor. It stays behind the door frame like it's still partly hiding, like it's still learning what it can do without being seen. And in every one of those nights, the ring moves too. That's when the fear stopped being about an object and started being about the fact that something is in my home, or at least something can enter it. And it is doing 2 things at once. Pulling the ring away and moving closer to my bed. My bedroom door is open right now. I didn't close it. I don't know if that makes a difference, but I can't stand the idea of the door being closed and something being behind it. At least, With it open, I can see the dark hallway. At least I can tell myself I'm not trapping myself in here. I haven't slept yet. I'm sitting up in bed with the lamp on. The camera is pointed at the door. The ring is on the bedside table, not on my hand, because I can't tolerate the thought of waking up and finding it gone again like it was stolen from my skin. The apartment is quiet, but it's the kind of quiet that feels watched. Every small sound makes my muscles tighten, the building settling, a pipe cooling, someone's distant footsteps in the hall. Normal sounds, but tonight they don't feel normal. Tonight, every noise feels like it might be a cover for something else. Whatever has been pulling the ring back toward my grandmother's sister has been coming for me at the same time. I don't know if the hand belongs to my grandmother's sister, or to something that came with her, or to something that just found a way through the ring like it was a door left open. I don't know if it wants the ring back because it was taken from a body, because it doesn't belong to my family, because it was never meant to be worn. I don't know if it's trying to leave and dragging the ring with it like an anchor, or if it's trying to return somewhere, and the ring is the path. I don't know if the hand is coming for the ring or for me. I don't know if it stops when the ring leaves the building, or if it keeps coming because it already knows where I sleep. I don't know if the pace will stay the same, 1 inch a night, or if it will get impatient when it gets close enough. Tonight is night 10. I'm going to stay awake. I'm telling myself that if I stay awake, I'll see it clearly. I'll catch it in the light. I'll understand, and maybe understanding will make it less powerful. But, if I'm honest, the real reason I'm staying awake is simpler than that. I'm scared that if I fall asleep, I'll wake up, and the ring will be farther away again, and the hand will be closer. And I won't have any way to pretend this is just grief anymore. Story 3. I'm at a lake house in the middle of the woods with my friends. We've only been here a few hours, but the mood has been tense from the start, including for me. We found a goat out on the trail, and since then everyone keeps saying they hear things coming from the trees. I can't hear anything myself, but I have cochlear implants and I miss small sounds all the time. Lately, my implants have been acting up too, which is making me doubt everything I'm noticing. I wanted an outside perspective on whether any of this sounds off, so I'm writing it all down. I'll start from the beginning because the town we're in has a history, and whether it's real or not, it's the kind of history that gets into your head. I've known for most of my life that my hometown, especially the woods around it, has a bad reputation. Bad might not be the perfect word, but it's the only one that fits. People there don't talk about the forest like it's just trees and hiking trails. They talk about it like it's a place with its own rules. And if you don't respect them. There was one case in particular that got national attention when I was a toddler back in 2006. I was too young to remember it, but I grew up hearing it from adults, then later seeing it pop up online. It's the kind of story that conspiracy people love. It's been mentioned by horror YouTubers, and I've even seen it referenced in the missing 411 type of circles. A college guy went missing. Not wandered off and got hurt. Missing. He vanished in a way that made no sense. Then, after a while, he showed up again. Alive, but not okay. He came back with injuries and trauma, and he was different afterward. Like something in him had snapped. He told people he'd been in hell. Or he said it was like hell. Over time, his story shifted depending on who asked and when. And I think nowadays he describes himself as more agnostic, like he doesn't even know what he believes anymore. But the core of it stayed the same. He talked about seeing demons, about being trapped somewhere that didn't feel like the real world. You can imagine what that did to a small town. People started filling in the blank spaces with whatever they feared most. Cults, ghosts, people trafficking, something in the woods, something under the ground. The truth is, I don't know what happened to him. I don't know if he lied, if he broke mentally, if it was some kind of prank that got out of hand, or if something truly strange happened. But stories like that don't fade in places like Fallsboro, Pennsylvania. They settle in and become part of the air. On top of that, we had decades of local folklore, urban legends, warnings parents told kids to keep them from wandering. The kind of scary tale that starts as "don't go into the woods alone" and ends with something watching you from behind the trees. Most towns have some version of that, but ours felt more intense. Maybe because of the missing person cases, maybe because of that one high-profile story, or maybe because the woods around town really are dense and easy to get lost in. I used to be obsessed with those stories. When I was younger, my friends and I would share them on camping trips and sleepovers. We'd whisper them late at night and scare each other on purpose. It was fun back then. It never felt personal. It was just something we played with, like a spooky hobby. I never expected to feel like I was standing in the middle of one. Until last week, I hadn't been back to Fallsboro since I graduated high school 3 years ago. I'd been living in Philadelphia studying pre-med biology at UPenn and trying to keep a normal social life at the same time. That didn't work. Not really. I learned fast that Ivy League workloads don't leave much space for being a person. I met people, sure, but most of them were study friends. People you share notes with. People you see in the library at 1 a.m. People you nod at in the hallway and promise you'll hang out after midterms. I had a rock climbing club, too. And those were probably the closest thing I had to real friends in college. But even that felt distant. Everyone was busy. Everyone was tired. I didn't party much, partly because I never had time, but also because loud places are hard for me. Music and crowd noise mess with my implants. Even when I can technically hear, it can turn into a messy wall of sound. It's hard to pick out voices. Hard to talk to strangers. Unless someone knows how to sign, I end up smiling and nodding and pretending I'm following along until I can leave. Most people don't know how to sign, so I learned to avoid noisy places. It's easier than feeling dependent and left out. The first couple summers, I stayed in Philly and did internships. I told myself it was to build my resume for med school, and that was true. But I also think I was scared to go home. Home meant the past. It meant the woods. It meant being the version of myself that existed before everything got complicated. By the time this spring semester ended, I was exhausted in a way that didn't feel normal. Not just tired, lonely. The kind of lonely that sits in your chest and makes you feel separate from everyone around you, even when you're surrounded by people. I don't know how else to explain it. People always talk about how hard it is to adjust to college, but I don't think anyone really explains the depression part, the quiet part, the part where you start thinking in a calm and scary way that maybe you could just stop, not in some dramatic scene, just stop trying so hard. Stop pushing. Stop caring. That thought scared me enough that I decided to take a real break. Academically, I was fine. Better than fine. I had 3 summer internships I'd done shadowing during semesters. My GPA was a 3.98. My MCAT practice scores were strong, and I was on track to graduate a semester early. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone right then. I just needed to breathe. My CAT is scheduled for September, and I planned to keep practicing, but I couldn't keep grinding without a pause. So I called my mom and asked if I could come home for the summer. She said yes immediately. She told me she missed her little girl, which should have made me roll my eyes, but it almost made me cry. I hadn't seen her much. She'd fly me out to my uncle's place in Vermont during winter breaks sometimes, but otherwise I mostly just called. I tried for weekly calls, but college makes everything slip. On the last day of finals, I said goodbye to my professors and my advisor, and to the few friends I'd managed to make. Then I packed, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling for a while. I didn't text my hometown friends yet. I'd kept in touch with them, but I didn't want to risk hearing no too early. It sounds pathetic, but I knew myself. If I asked and they weren't available, I might have stayed in Philly out of pride, out of embarrassment, out of whatever. And I needed to leave the city. I liked Philly, I really did, but something in me wanted to see the woods again. Like I needed to prove to myself that I could go back and nothing would happen. The next morning I woke up early, brushed my teeth, shoved my toothbrush into a Ziploc bag, and grabbed an energy drink from the vending machine because I'd already packed my French press. My mom was supposed to arrive a couple hours later, so I used that time to take a long shower. Showering is the one time I've learned to appreciate silence since I got my implants. Taking off the external pieces feels like taking off a heavy backpack. The world goes quiet in a way that is clean and simple. I can feel the water on my head, smell the lavender soap, watch the steam fog up the bathroom mirror, and for once, I'm not processing sound or fighting static or trying to figure out what someone said. It's just calm. I stayed in there almost an hour. Then I got out, did the basics, hair, skincare, a little makeup, heated up a frozen breakfast sandwich, and ate it in my dorm room like it was a special event. After that, I still had time, so I read the bell jar until my mom called. When she arrived, I carried my bags down and loaded them into her car. I can drive, but I never bothered having a car in Philly because everything I needed was so close to campus. I offered to drive back home since Fallsboro is almost 3 hours away, but she waved me off. "Nah, don't worry about it, Willie," she said. "Your old mom's still energetic. Plus, I wouldn't put my life in the hands of your driving." She laughed and bumped her shoulder into mine in that loud, affectionate way she has. For a second, she started signing to me without thinking, then switched back to talking like her brain was catching up to the fact that I can hear now. It was strangely sweet. "All right, Ma," I said. "Whatever you say." We talked a little about school, but talking still feels strange sometimes. My voice still doesn't feel like mine. I had to do training after my implants, and even now there are days where speaking feels like wearing someone else's clothes. After a while, I stopped forcing conversation and looked out the window instead. Trees blurred past the highway. The closer we got to Fallsboro, the more familiar the landscape became. The air looked different, like the sky sat lower. I tried not to overthink it. During the drive, I finally texted my friends. I made a group chat with my 4 closest people from home: Ashley, Britt, Avery, and Skylar. Those aren't their real names. Everyone in that group has been in my life since I was young, and even after moving away, they were the ones I kept checking in on. I wrote, "Hey girlies," including Avery, "how is everyone doing? I'm back home for the summer, for once, and want to see if y'all want to plan something. Could be fun." Then I tossed my phone aside and didn't look at it again for a while. I just watched the trees and let my thoughts spiral the way anxious thoughts always do. It's weird, but I've always been an anxious person, and sometimes I almost like it. Anxiety makes everything else feel less important. It gives my brain something to chew on. The buzz of my phone kept going off, but I ignored it and read Wuthering Heights until we pulled into my parents' driveway. Seeing my house again was strange. It was an old Victorian-style place from the 1860s, the kind of home that looks charming in daylight and creepy at night. It looked normal, but it also felt loaded with memories. That was the house where my friends hung out, where we told ghost stories, where we used to swear we heard footsteps upstairs when no one was there, even though it was probably just old pipes and settling wood. Inside, I dropped onto a couch that I didn't recognize. My mom must have bought it while I was gone. She told me my dad was napping and she was going to make me a snack. While she was gone, I scrolled my phone until my brain went numb. Then I saw the group chat notifications and finally opened them. Avery said he was bored being back in town and that we could all use his uncle's lake house because he'd inherited it. He warned us there were only 3 bedrooms, so the girlies would have to share. Skylar immediately claimed she was sharing a bed with me, joking, no homo, like we were still 16. Ashley said she was down. Britt said yes too, but added that Avery better kick out his roommate because that dude is weird. Avery argued that his roommate Clyde was great once you got to know him, and also hot. Britt accused Avery of just liking Clyde because Clyde bought him things. Avery joked that he pleads the fifth. I laughed, typed back, and asked when we wanted to go. Avery said Clyde had a 5-day work trip starting next Tuesday, so maybe then. Otherwise, we'd have to deal with Clyde being there. I asked how old Clyde was. Avery refused to answer. Ashley said Clyde was like 37 and had been friends with Avery's uncle. Britt called it a sugar baby situation. I was basically horrified. Avery is in his early 20s. 37 is an entire different life stage. I warned him to be careful. He swore he would be. Britt told him that was debatable. Skylar said it wasn't fine, but to enjoy it while it lasted. It was the same messy, familiar energy I remembered. And it hit me hard how much I'd missed it. When I put my phone down, my mom returned with a plate of cheese, crackers, and soppressata, plus a glass of Lambrusco. It was the exact snack she used to make me as a kid, minus the wine back then. The nostalgia hit so hard I almost cried. I hugged her, thanked her, and tried to swallow the feeling down. That night I put on a horror movie and zoned out. My mom walked through the living room like it was normal for me to be watching something creepy. Eventually my dad came in, half awake, hugged me and squinted at the screen. "Oh, hey baby, you're home," he said. "Sorry, work kicked my ass last night. I would have picked you up otherwise. God, what are you watching?" "It's just a horror movie." He grunted like that, explained everything. Then he asked if I wanted to go fishing the next day, like fishing could solve anything. I said yes, because honestly, it felt nice to be asked. The week passed quietly after that. I watched movies, drank wine with my mom, and went fishing with my dad at a nearby lake. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running. I decided not to study at all that first week. I gave myself permission to rot on the couch and be happy about it. When the weekend came, I packed for the lake house. Spare clothes, hiking gear, boots, and my climbing stuff. I didn't even know if there would be anything worth climbing out there, but I packed it anyway because if I found a good rock face and didn't have my shoes, I'd be furious. I also brought a huge water bottle because Avery said there was about a half-hour hike from where we'd parked to the house. Avery picked us up in his SUV yesterday afternoon. I was the last stop, so everyone else was already in the car. I got the front seat, which I appreciated. Avery signed hey at me out of habit, then remembered he could talk to me now and switched to speaking. As soon as I sat down, it was like being hit with a wave. Everyone talking at once. "I missed you. How are you? Have you gotten laid recently?" That kind of chaotic affection only your oldest friends can get away with. We drove for about 10 minutes before turning down smaller roads. They filled the ride with gossip and drama. Avery and Skylar complained about relationships. Britt talked about school stress. Ashley ranted about books. It was loud and annoying and perfect. I got a little emotional, which I tried to hide. I got my implants at the end of high school, and I didn't have many moments back then where I could really hear my friends clearly. Now I could hear them, mostly. Their voices sounded different than I'd imagined. Deeper or softer in places. More real. It made me realize how much I'd missed. The lake house was isolated, so Avery parked about a mile away in a private driveway near the edge of the woods. There was a clear path in, and it was still daylight, so it didn't seem like a big deal. I grabbed my backpack. It was way bigger than everyone else's. Skylar stared at it. "What the hell, what do you even need all that for?" "It's mostly climbing stuff," I said. "I don't know this part of the woods, so I packed extra, just in case." Avery laughed and made some joke about Britt being the only other one who would bring a carabiner. Britt mocked him. Skylar rolled her eyes at both of them. Ashley stayed a step behind, smiling like she was watching a familiar show. They were being their normal selves, but I felt an anxious push under my ribs. I wanted to get moving. Standing still in the woods always makes me feel like I'm waiting for something. "Do we want to start walking?" I said. "Or are we just going to stand here?" The tone came out sharper than I meant. Skylar looked at me like I'd slapped her. "Whoa. Okay. We're just talking." I immediately regretted it. Instead of trying to explain out loud, I signed a quick apology, then laughed and said I just wanted to get to the house and relax. I tried to make it sound like excitement instead of nerves. Skylar softened and admitted she was still not used to me speaking. Then Avery started walking into the trees, and we followed. For the first 10 minutes, it was normal. Ashley and I ended up trailing behind the others. She signed to me about a book she was reading, The Road, I think, and I told her about Wuthering Heights, and then started talking about rock climbing. We pointed out steep rock faces as we passed them. She called me lame. I told her she was a snob. It felt easy. Ashley and I have always had a different kind of friendship than the others. Avery is the one I've known the longest, but Ashley is the one who understands silence. She's mute because of a childhood injury to her vocal cords. We met in elementary school, back when my hearing was already getting worse, and signing was normal for both of us. When the others are loud, Ashley and I can step into our own quiet world without even trying. For a little while on the trail, it was just us. The others were ahead, voices drifting back through the trees. Ashley and I walked and signed, separate from the noise. Then Avery shattered that calm. He yelled from up ahead, "Hey, come here." We found a goat. I blinked, thinking I misheard. "A goat?" I called back. Ashley and I sped up, and when we reached them, it was real. An actual goat standing off the side of the path like it belonged there. It was big, bigger than the tiny petting zoo ones. Its coat was pitch black and its horns were thick and curved. What made my stomach tighten was the way it looked at us. Its eyes were a strange gold, and the pupils were horizontal and unsettling. It didn't look curious. It looked like it was tracking us. Avery joked that it must have wandered from a farm, even though the nearest one was miles away. Skylar pointed out that the closest farm would be on the other side of a cliff face. Britt asked if goats could even be out here. Skylar said goats aren't native, that basically every goat in the U.S. is livestock invasive, or a pet. Then the goat let out a sudden loud bleat that cut through the trees. All of us jumped. Avery leaned in, squinting. "Wait, look at its eyes. I think it has cataracts." When I looked closer, I saw what he meant. The eyes weren't just gold. They were cloudy, almost milky, like a white film was covering them. The horizontal pupils were barely visible, like someone had painted over them. That should have made me feel sorry for it. Instead, it made me feel worse. A blind goat alone in deep woods, miles from any farm, standing like it was waiting for us. Something about it didn't fit. I tried to joke, saying it was impressive if it had gotten here while blind. Skylar said she didn't think that made sense, that maybe someone dropped it off or it escaped from the truck. Britt asked again if it could just live out here, and Skylar insisted no, not really. While they talked, I kept staring at the goat and hating the way my skin felt. The clouded eyes made it look ancient, wrong, like it had walked out of a story that should have stayed a story. Finally, I pushed us to keep moving, using the excuse that it was getting late. In reality, I wanted distance between me and that animal as fast as possible. After we left the goat behind, the rest of the walk was mostly normal again. I talked more with Britt and Skylar while Ashley stayed a little behind me, jumping in when she wanted. We talked about our lives. Skylar was thinking about getting a PhD. Britt was overwhelmed and unsure she'd even stay in school. Ashley had been focusing more on freelance writing than her degree. We teased Avery to get his attention because he'd started walking ahead, quieter than usual. He would fall back sometimes and talk, but something about him seemed distracted, like he wasn't fully with us. Near the end of the path, he stopped so suddenly that we almost ran into him. He lifted a hand for us to pause. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "What?" Skylar said. "I swear I heard a scream," Avery said, and the way his eyes moved made it clear he was scanning the woods. I stood still, listening as hard as I could. I heard nothing except the faint rustle of trees. Maybe a bird. My implants were quiet, no static at that moment. Skylar shrugged. I didn't hear anything. Maybe it was the goat. We're probably still close enough. Then he turned and kept walking, like if he moved forward, the fear would stay behind. We made it to the lake house around 6. It took longer than Avery expected, but not by much. The house itself was nice, wooden, a little old, right near the water. It had that family vacation look that can feel cozy in daytime and isolated at night. We claimed rooms and dropped our bags. I ended up sharing with Ashley instead of Skylar because it just made more sense. Avery offered pizza, and I said yes without hesitation. I have no idea how he managed to get delivery out there, but I didn't question it. We hung out in the kitchen and barely talked, like the hike had drained something out of us. After a while, we got bored and went outside to the fire pit near the lake. We lit a fire, played quiet music, made s'mores, and tried to relax. Even though the sun was still up, we started telling ghost stories. It felt like muscle memory, like we were kids again. Avery told the old drip, drip, drip story about the dog. Skylar told a version of the Wendigo myth about a hiker who eats his friend and becomes a monster. Britt told a half-hearted haunted house story. Then Ashley told one that stuck to my brain like a burr. Her story was about a figure in local folklore around our town. It has a lot of names depending on who's telling it. The many-faced god, the stranger, the brood, the nut snatcher, which is the name people use most when talking about missing persons. In a lot of versions, it takes people who are already vulnerable, people who are mentally ill, people who are unstable, people who won't be believed if they come back. That was the connection Ashley made to the old college kid case. In some versions of the myth, the thing is a mimic. In others, it's a shapeshifter. Some people argue those are two separate creatures. Others insist it's the same thing doing different tricks. In Ashley's version, it was a mimic. A woman's husband had run away, and she went looking for him because she knew he'd gone hiking near Ricketts Glen. She searched the trails in the brush, calling his name until she found an elk. The elk had golden eyes that were clouded over, the way that goat's eyes were clouded. In Ashley's story, when the woman looked into those eyes, she felt like something was shifting, like her luck was finally going to change, like she was about to find him. Then she heard her husband's voice calling from deeper in the woods. She ran toward it, through thick brush, across a stream, over rocks. The voice got louder and clearer. She started crying, relieved, because he was so close, just beyond the trees. And then Ashley ended the story there. Avery stared at her. That cannot be the ending. Ashley signed back, deadpan, that no one knows what happened. Then she smirked in a way that made it obvious she was enjoying our reaction. We laughed, but it wasn't the relaxed kind of laughter from earlier. It was nervous, like we were trying to shake off a feeling. By then, the fire had burned down to coals, so we added more wood and got it going again. We kept talking as the sun sank. We watched the moon rise and the first stars appear. From the outside, it should have been peaceful. But that's when everyone started acting strange. It began with Avery. He kept glancing into the trees, always toward the same section of woods. He'd look like he was about to speak, then stop himself. He still made jokes, but they were less frequent, and his smile looked forced. Then Skylar started doing it too. Then Britt. Then Ashley. All of them, one by one, kept looking into the same dark area. like something was there. It wasn't dramatic. It was small movements, quick glances, stiff shoulders, the kind of body language you get when someone doesn't want to admit they're scared. I asked what was wrong. They all gave the same answer. They thought they heard something. I told myself it made sense. Cochlear implants aren't perfect. Small noises get lost. If something was moving out there quietly, they could catch it, and I couldn't. The only thing I noticed on my end was a faint static now and then, which wasn't that unusual, just annoying. After a while, the group agreed to go inside because they were getting too freaked out. I followed them, trying not to show how unsettled I was by the fact that all four of them had reacted the same way. Inside, Avery put on a French horror movie. Apparently, that made sense to him, even though we were already scared. The others still claimed they heard things from outside, but after a while they stopped reacting, like they were trying to ignore it. The mood stayed heavy. Everyone was forcing normal conversation, forcing laughter, forcing interest in the movie. I suggested we watch something fun instead, because I thought horror was only feeding the feeling. So we switched to dumb YouTube videos. And for a bit, it worked. People loosened up. Britt laughed. Skylar started talking with her hands again, animated. Avery seemed a little more like himself. But they still said they heard noises. Meanwhile, the static in my implants came and went, and it felt stronger than usual. Not constant, but sharp when it hit, like a dirty buzz sliding across my hearing. It made me tense up every time it started. It felt like something was wrong with the air. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. We didn't drink our first night because we wanted at least one day without a hangover. I fell asleep without much trouble, but Ashley tossed and turned beside me for a while before she finally settled. I woke up around 6 in the morning, and Ashley was asleep, so I guess she managed eventually. I got up and went to the kitchen to make breakfast and ran into Avery. He looked awful. I asked if he slept. He said he didn't. Avery has insomnia, so that's not totally shocking, but the way he said it made it sound like he hadn't slept because he couldn't, not because he wasn't tired. He told me the noises outside didn't stop until sunrise. I didn't know what to say to that, so I acted like it was no big deal. I told myself we were all just spooking each other out. New place, deep woods, scary stories, old hometown legends, a creepy goat. Our brains were doing what brains do. I decided to ignore it and go for a climb. Avery had mentioned there was a rock face about half a mile from the lake house. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to make me happy. I set up my gear, harness, rope, carabiners, all of it. The climb was maybe 20 to 30 yards high, which is absolutely high enough to ruin your life if you mess up. I started climbing slowly, focusing on foot placement and handholds. At first, it felt normal. Then the static began again. It started light, like a faint hiss, and I tried to push through it, but it grew fast, swelling into something loud and thick, like a swarm of bees trapped inside my head. It got so bad I could barely think. My heart started pounding, not from the climb, but from panic, because when your hearing suddenly turns into a screaming buzz, your body reacts like you're being attacked. I found a spot where I could press my feet against the rock and keep tension on the rope. Then I took off the external pieces of my implants, so everything went silent. The relief was instant. It was like stepping out of a room with blaring alarms. I finished the climb in silence, reached the top, and tried putting them back on. The static was still there. I took them off again before coming back down, not wanting to deal with it while I was moving. When my feet hit the ground, I put the implants back on, and the static was gone, completely, like it had never happened. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, trying to make sense of it. If it was interference, why would it only happen on the wall? Why would it stop the moment I was back on the ground? It could be some weird device, a radio tower, a piece of equipment in the house, anything. I know that. But stacked on top of everything else, my friends staring into the same patch of woods, everyone claiming to hear things, the goat with clouded eyes, the old local story Ashley told, it made my skin prickle. I'm writing this a few hours after that climb. I'm sitting back at the lake house, trying to act normal, trying to enjoy the day. Maybe nothing is happening and we're all just stressed and letting old fears creep back in. Maybe I'm overreacting because I'm home again and my brain is full of those childhood stories. Still, I wanted to get it out in one place because it feels strange in a way I can't fully explain. If this sounds weird to anyone reading, tell me. If it sounds normal, tell me that too. I'm going to try to enjoy the rest of the trip, but if anything else happens, I'll update. Story 4. This happened more than 15 years ago in Guadeloupe, a French island in the Caribbean. I still remember it clearly because it was the first time I understood how fast your mind can turn normal sounds into something terrifying when you're alone and cut off from everything familiar. Back then, I was living in a small town called Baillif. My mother had just moved to another town, Petit Bourg, and I hadn't visited her new place yet. Around the same time, I got a job as a school supervisor in Pointe-à-Pitre. If you know Guadeloupe, you'll understand why that mattered. Pointe-à-Pitre is busy, and the drive from Baillif to there is not something you want to do every day, if you can avoid it. Petit Bourg made a lot more sense for commuting, so my mother suggested a simple plan. During the week, I could stay at her new house so I could get to work more easily. It sounded practical. It sounded normal. I said yes without thinking twice. The first time I went there, though, I felt something I couldn't really explain. Not like a ghost feeling, not like something supernatural was in the air. It was more like the place didn't feel connected to anything else. It felt cut off. There were no rows of other houses, no friendly street lights, no nearby shops, no background noise from traffic. It sat in the middle of thick vegetation, the kind that grows fast and wild in the tropics. You couldn't just turn onto a regular street and park. You had to take a dirt road, and the dirt road felt like it belonged to the jungle more than it belonged to people. During the day, it was already quiet. At night, I imagined it would be the kind of dark that doesn't feel empty. It feels full. There wasn't much around us. The only person nearby was the landlord, and even he lived farther away, across the path and deeper into the same green mess of trees and bushes. If something happened, there wouldn't be a neighbor to knock on the wall and ask if you were okay. There wouldn't be anyone close enough to hear you. Still, I told myself I was overthinking it. It was my mother's house. She was fine there. People live in isolated places all the time. And honestly, for the first few days, it was boring in the normal way. I'd go to work, come back tired, eat something, then sleep. Work, sleep, repeat. I didn't have time to create stories in my head. Then, one night, my mother went out to spend the evening with friends. It wasn't a big deal. She just said she'd be back later. I didn't even notice how important that detail was until after she left, and the house started feeling different. Not because anything had changed, but because I was suddenly aware that I was alone. Completely alone. I did what I always did. I got ready for bed, checked the doors out of habit, and turned off the lights. The house dropped into darkness so quickly it felt like someone had thrown a blanket over it. I lay down and let my body relax. My brain started to drift, half awake and half asleep, the way it does when you're tired enough that you could sleep anywhere. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not outside, not down the hallway. Above me. It was the kind of sound that instantly pulls you back to full awareness. My eyes opened. My heart sped up in a way I didn't choose. I stayed still and listened. Silence, I told myself. It was probably the house settling. Or maybe an animal on the roof. In a place surrounded by vegetation, that would make sense. I closed my eyes again and tried to go back to sleep. Then it happened again. Heavy footsteps directly above my head, like something with weight, was slowly walking across the ceiling. Not a quick scurry like a rat, not light taps like birds. Real steps. Measured, slow, and heavy enough that I could tell when the weight shifted from one step to the next. I sat up. My first reaction wasn't ghost. It wasn't monster. It was confusion mixed with irritation, like my brain couldn't accept the sound because it didn't fit into any normal category. I turned the light back on and stared around the room like that would solve it. I looked at the ceiling, the corners, the window, the door. Nothing. And for a moment, the noise stopped. That almost made it worse, because now it felt like whatever it was had noticed me. I know how that sounds, but when you're alone at night, your mind takes small details and gives them meaning. I lay back down again, trying to force myself to be calm. I told myself that even if it was an animal, it couldn't get inside. The roof was the roof. The walls were the walls. The steps started again. At this point, I wasn't sleepy anymore. I was wide awake, listening to every sound and trying to measure it. The footsteps moved, like the thing was pacing from one part of the roof to another. I tried to guess how big it was based on the spacing. My brain did that annoying thing where it runs calculations even when it's scared. Now, I've always considered myself a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in paranormal forces. I like scary stories the way I like movies. Fun when you know you're safe. To me, those things are entertainment. I don't carry them into real life. But rational doesn't mean fearless. Rational just means you want an explanation. So I did what people do when they're trying to stay rational in a situation that feels wrong. I tried to find the source. I got out of bed and started checking the house. Slowly, quietly, moving like I was in someone else's home even though I was the only one there. I hated the fact that I was doing the exact thing horror movies make fun of, the person who walks around whispering into empty rooms like an idiot. But it also felt impossible to just stay in bed and pretend it wasn't happening. If I couldn't solve it, I knew I would lie there imagining the worst until morning. I checked the living room, nothing. The kitchen, nothing. The bathroom, nothing. I looked out the windows, but outside was just black and shadows and thick plants. The night in that area didn't give you shapes you could understand. It gave you a wall of darkness. When I went back to my room, the footsteps had stopped again. I stood there, waiting, almost holding my breath. I kept thinking, okay, maybe it's over. Maybe it was a tree branch or something. Then the footsteps returned. And this time there was another sound with it. Metal. A dragging, scraping noise like a chain being pulled across a hard surface. The sound was uneven and ugly, stopping and starting, like something was moving and the metal was catching on bumps. That was the moment my rational brain started losing ground. Because animals on roofs made sense, but chains? Chains didn't make sense. Not in a quiet house in the middle of dense vegetation, with my mother away and no neighbors nearby. I stood there with the light on, staring up at the ceiling, as if I could see through it. I felt my stomach tighten. My throat got dry. My mind started building images without my permission. Someone on the roof, someone trying to break in, someone dragging something heavy. The worst part was the movement. It wasn't one spot. The sounds traveled, first above my room, then toward another part of the house, then back again. It felt like whatever it was had a pattern, like it was walking back and forth. I decided to call my mother. It felt like the most normal thing to do. If I could hear her voice, I could anchor myself to reality. No answer. I tried again. Then I texted. Still nothing. I told myself she was out with friends. Maybe her phone was on silent. Maybe she was in a place with loud music. But the longer she didn't respond, the smaller the house felt around me. For close to 30 minutes, I listened to footsteps and the dragging chain moving across the roof. Sometimes it would pause long enough that I thought it was gone, and then it would start up again. Each time it started, my body reacted like it was a new danger. I tried to think of explanations. Maybe the landlord was doing something up there, but why would he be on the roof in the middle of the night? Maybe a branch had fallen and was scraping in the wind? But the sound didn't match that. The footsteps were too clear. I even started blaming electronics because when you can't find the real source, your brain will pick any explanation that feels safer than unknown. I unplugged the TV. Then I unplugged the blender. I unplugged pretty much everything I could find, as if the house might be producing sounds just to mess with me. It didn't help. The footsteps kept going. The chain kept dragging. Finally, I made the decision that I now realize was the worst possible choice in that moment. Instead of staying inside where at least I had walls and a locked door, I decided I needed to know what was up there. So I went outside. The night hit me immediately. It wasn't just dark, it was thick. There were no streetlights, no glow from nearby houses, no easy horizon line. The vegetation around the house was black in a way that made it look like one single shape pressing in from all directions. I grabbed a flashlight. I remember holding it tightly, like it was more than a tool, like it was protection. I stepped out and closed the door behind me as quietly as I could. And here's the part that sounds ridiculous now. I didn't even turn the flashlight on at first. I don't know why I did that. I think some part of me believed that light would announce me, that if there was a person on the roof, they would see the beam and know where I was. If it was an animal, maybe the light would scare it and make it do something unpredictable. I was trying to move like I wasn't there, which is a stupid plan when you're walking around a house in complete darkness. I moved slowly, keeping close to the wall, listening. I could still hear movement above me. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Every few steps I stopped to see if the sound moved with me. As I rounded toward the back of the house, I noticed something I honestly can't believe I hadn't fully understood earlier, even though it was right there in the daylight. The back of the house was partially buried into a hill. Not buried like it was underground, but like the terrain rose behind it and pressed close. It looked as if the land had shifted at some point, or the house had been built into the slope. Either way, it meant something important. From behind the house, you could climb up the slope and reach the roof. The roof wasn't high from that angle. It was accessible. That realization hit me at the same time I looked up. Two eyes were staring at me. They weren't the soft reflection of a cat at a distance. They were bright points in the dark, steady, and fixed on me. For a second, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. My brain tried to make it human. It tried to make it a face. Behind the eyes was a large shape, darker than the darkness around it, a heavy outline against the sky that I could barely see. It didn't move. It just watched. I froze. In that moment, I should have turned around and gone back inside. I should have run, locked the door, and waited until morning. That would have been the smart survival instinct. But I have to be honest about who I was then. I'm not only brave, I can also be stupid. Instead of running, I stepped closer. The shape made a sound, a low grunt, rough and animal, not a human voice. Then I heard the chain again, clear this time, dragging as the creature shifted its weight. The eyes moved slightly, and the dark shape backed away, still facing me. That was when I finally turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on the roof, and there it was. A pig, not a small pig, not the kind you see in a clean pen on a farm. This thing looked like it had been living in mud, built out of pure muscle and stubbornness. Its body was huge, its head looked heavy, and its skin was dark and dirty. The chain was attached to it, or at least tangled around it, and it scraped loudly every time the pig moved. I stared at it, trying to let my fear drain out through understanding. My heart was still racing, but now my brain had something solid to hold on to. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a man with a weapon. It wasn't something supernatural. It was just a very large animal standing on a roof, staring down at me like I was the one trespassing. The pig snorted again, irritated by the light. It took a few steps, and the chain followed with that same awful metallic scraping sound. Those were the chains I had been hearing. Those were the sounds that had turned my imagination into a horror movie. And the heavy footsteps? Those were real too. Of course they were. A pig that big, walking on a roof, would sound exactly like a person up there. The relief I felt wasn't calm relief. It was the kind that makes you feel weak and angry at the same time. I remember thinking I was terrified for nothing, and then immediately thinking, no, I was terrified because this situation is actually insane. Because even if it wasn't paranormal, it was still a huge animal on the roof of an isolated house in the middle of nowhere. While I was alone at night, I stood there shining the light on it, trying to figure out what to do next. The pig didn't attack. It just looked uncomfortable and annoyed, like it wanted to keep walking but didn't trust me. The chain clinked and dragged as it moved, and it paced like it had been pacing the entire time, back and forth, as if the roof had become its personal path. I backed away slowly, keeping the flashlight on it while increasing the distance between us. I didn't want to startle it. I didn't want it to panic and charge. I had no idea how likely that was, but I wasn't interested in testing it. Once I got back inside, I locked the door and finally breathed properly again. I called my mother again. This time she picked up, cheerful and relaxed, and I could hear noise in the background like she was still out with people. I told her, probably too fast, that there was something on the roof and I'd gone outside and it was a pig, and I was not okay. She paused like she didn't believe me at first. Then she asked questions. Where was it? How big? Was I sure? I told her I was very sure. It was standing on the roof like it owned the place. We tried to think of what it could mean. The simplest explanation was probably the real one. The pig had escaped from somewhere nearby while still attached to part of its chain. Maybe it had broken loose from a post or a pen. In its confused wandering, it had climbed the slope behind the house and ended up on the roof. Maybe it couldn't get down easily. Or maybe it could have gotten down but chose not to because the roof felt safe and flat and out of reach of other animals. That's the funny part, if you can call it funny. While I was inside imagining some kind of nightmare, this pig was probably just doing pig things. Walking around, testing the surface, dragging its chain, making itself comfortable. It wasn't trying to scare anyone. It wasn't thinking about me at all. I eventually fell asleep, but not quickly. Even with the explanation, every sound kept me tense. When you've been scared for that long, your body doesn't just switch off because you learned the truth. It takes time to come down from it. After that night, the story became something I could laugh about, but only after a while. At the time, it felt like a lesson I hadn't asked for. People always say they would handle scary situations calmly, that they would be logical and think things through. But when you're alone in a strange house, in a place with no lights and no neighbors, and you hear heavy footsteps above your head, your mind doesn't stay logical. It fills in blanks. It creates meaning. It makes the unknown feel personal. I understand now why people run when they hear something strange. Their instincts are better than mine. Their brains are smarter about survival. They don't go outside into the dark to investigate glowing eyes on a roof. Because the truth is, sometimes the paranormal encounter is just a very ordinary explanation that happens to look terrifying in the wrong conditions. Sometimes it's just an animal. Sometimes it's just wind. Sometimes it's just your own imagination doing what it does best when you feed it fear. And in my case, the monster that had been stalking the roof for half the night was real, heavy, loud, and covered in mud, an absolute giant of a pig, dragging its chain like a horror movie prop. while I stood underneath it trying to decide whether I was about to die. It wasn't a ghost, but for a while, in that house in Petite Bourg, it sounded exactly like one. Story 5. When I was about 12, I went through a phase where YouTube basically raised me. Not in a normal way either. I wasn't watching gaming channels or funny clips. I was glued to urban legends, creepy rituals, and those late-night true horror stories videos where the narrator whispers like they're afraid the microphone will hear them breathing. I would get home from school, toss my backpack on the floor, and fall into the same routine. One video would turn into another, then another, and the next thing I knew, it would be dark outside and my stomach would drop because I had homework and dinner and real life waiting for me. But at that age, the fear was part of the fun. It felt like playing with fire, only safer because it was all on a screen. That was the night I found the Daruma-san ritual. Some videos called it the bath game. The thumbnail was always some blurry shower curtain with a shadow behind it, or a doll-like face looking out of darkness. The comments were full of people daring each other to try it, others swearing they did and telling stories that sounded half made up, half too specific to be completely fake. The whole thing felt like it sat in that uncomfortable area between a harmless internet story and something you maybe shouldn't mess with. The more I watched, the more it got under my skin. It wasn't like Bloody Mary, where you could laugh it off and say it's just a mirror trick. This one had rules, steps, a right way and a wrong way, which immediately made it feel real to my 12-year-old brain. If something has instructions, it feels possible. That's how kids think. Give us a list and we'll believe anything can be built. By the time I finally shut my laptop, I had already made up my mind. I was going to do it the next day. It wasn't even a question. I knew my parents would be out for a while. I knew my siblings wouldn't be home. I'd have the house to myself, which in my head was perfect. If it was going to be scary, I wanted to control it. I wanted it to be on my terms. Looking back, that mindset is almost funny. Fear doesn't work that way. You don't invite it in and then tell it what time to leave. The next day, the moment the front door closed and I heard the car pull away, the house went quiet in that particular way it only does when you're alone. It wasn't peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet where you suddenly notice the refrigerator hum and the little creaks in the walls. The kind where even your own footsteps sound too loud. I remember standing in the hallway for a second. I had that mix of excitement and dread buzzing in my chest. Part of me was already regretting it, but the bigger part wanted to prove something to myself. Like if I could do this, I'd be braver, or tougher, or maybe just less bored. The version of the story I had heard was simple but nasty. There was a girl who died in a shower. She slipped. She fell. In the worst version, she hit the faucet in just the wrong way and gouged out her eye. The ritual was built around that moment, like you were replaying the last seconds of her life and calling her attention to you. The rules were always the same in every video, and the consistency made it scarier. You were supposed to be completely alone in the house. All the lights had to be off. It had to happen in the bathroom, in the shower. You turn off the lights, close your eyes, and step into the shower. The important part was keeping your eyes closed the whole time. You couldn't open them, not even for a second, because that was how you broke it. That was how you messed up the ritual. That was how you let something happen. Then, while you washed your hair, you repeated the same phrase over and over. Daruma-san fell down. Daruma-san fell down. You didn't stop repeating it until you were finished washing. After that, you rinsed your hair, still keeping your eyes closed. That was when, according to the videos, you were supposed to see something even with your eyes shut. Not with your normal sight, but like an image pressed into the inside of your eyelids. The girl, the shower, the slip, the fall, the moment she died. Then you asked one question. Why did you fall? And after you asked it, you had to get out of the shower without opening your eyes, leave the bathroom as fast as you could, and go straight to sleep. No looking around, no checking mirrors, no turning on extra lights. Just bed, eyes shut, done. The next day was where it turned into a game. That's what people called it anyway, like that made it less disturbing. They said she would follow you. You might feel her behind you, like footsteps you couldn't quite hear. Like the air would change. If she got too close, you had to say a certain phrase to stop her and push her back, almost like telling a dog to stay. By the end of the day, if you made it without her catching you, you were supposed to say, "I cut you loose," and that would end it. If you did everything right, they promised you'd have good luck afterward. At 12, hearing good luck attached to something scary is basically a dare wrapped like a prize. I didn't think like an adult. I didn't think, why would something dangerous reward you? I thought, if I can handle the fear, I get something out of it, like life worked on points. So I got ready. I brought my towel and clean clothes into the bathroom because I was taking the instructions seriously. I stood there looking at the shower curtain and the white tile and the sink, and it all looked normal, too normal. That was part of what made it hard to believe anything could really happen. It was my bathroom. I brushed my teeth in there. I did my hair in there. I'd sat on the edge of the tub talking to my mom while she cleaned. It didn't feel like a place where something from an urban legend could reach. Then I reached for the light switch. And this is the part that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. Because the day I actually did it, I wasn't as careful as I believed I was. I was nervous, and I was rushing, and I was more focused on proving I could do it than following every rule perfectly. I stepped into the shower, pulled the curtain closed, and took a deep breath. My heart was thumping hard enough that I felt it in my throat. I closed my eyes. That alone changed everything. When you close your eyes in the shower, you lose your sense of space almost immediately. The sound of the water fills your ears. The warmth makes the air thick. The wet tile under your feet feels slippery even when it isn't. You can't see the edges of the tub, can't see the curtain, can't see the drain. You're just standing there in a small box, blind, on purpose. I turned the water on and flinched when it hit my shoulders because I was expecting something else, something colder maybe. Some hand grabbing me, something moving behind the curtain. I forced myself to breathe normally. Then I started washing my hair, the way the ritual said. Daruma-san fell down. Daruma-san fell down. I said it in a quiet voice at first, embarrassed even though no one was there. Then I remembered the videos saying you had to keep repeating it, and I got louder, like volume would make me safer. Daruma-san fell down. Daruma-san fell down. I worked shampoo into my hair, fingers rubbing my scalp, trying to focus on the ordinary sensations. The slick foam, the water running down my back, the smell of whatever cheap shampoo we had at the time. I kept repeating the phrase over and over until it started to feel like it wasn't even English anymore, just sounds. After a while, I couldn't tell if I'd been doing it for 1 minute or 10. Time gets weird when you're scared and trying to follow rules. Finally, I decided I was done washing. My arms were tired and my throat felt dry from repeating the same words. I started rinsing my hair. That was when it happened. Even with my eyes closed, I saw something. Not like a clear picture, not like a dream, but like a dark shape forming against the inside of my eyelids. It had movement to it, like the difference between imagining something and actually watching it. I saw a girl in a shower. I saw her feet slip. I saw her body jerk in panic, trying to catch herself. Then there was a violent, sharp motion, like she hit something hard. And I heard a scream. It wasn't faint. It wasn't like a thought. It sounded like it was happening right there with me, inside the bathroom, almost inside my skull. A loud, raw, terrified scream that made my whole body tense up. I froze with my hands still in my hair, water pouring over my forehead. For a second, I forgot I was supposed to keep my eyes closed because everything in me wanted to look. I wanted to confirm it. I wanted to see that it was nothing. But I didn't open them. I don't know if that was bravery or fear. Maybe I was more afraid of what I'd see if I looked than of what I was hearing with my eyes shut. My mouth felt dry. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I had to force the words out because the ritual said you had to ask. Why did you fall? The moment I finished that sentence, something slammed down onto my head. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was a hard hit that made me yelp and stumble backward, my foot sliding on the tub floor. Pain flashed through my scalp. Instinct took over and my eyes flew open. The shower rod had fallen straight down and struck me. It was one of those heavy rods that stretches across the tub and stays in place by pressure. It had been there for over a year. No one had ever had trouble with it. I hadn't grabbed the curtain. I hadn't yanked on anything. I hadn't even brushed it, as far as I knew. Yet it had dropped like someone had pushed it loose on purpose. For a split second, I just stared at it in shock, water dripping from my chin. My heart was pounding so hard that my chest hurt. Then I realized something else. The bathroom was completely dark. Not dim, not shadowy. Pitch black, like the lights were off and the door was closed and the whole room was swallowed. I stood there with water running over me, eyes wide, trying to understand what I was seeing, or not seeing. The only reason I knew the rod had hit me was because I could feel it, and because I could hear it clatter. My first thought was that maybe my eyes hadn't adjusted, maybe I'd opened them too fast and everything was just blurred. But it wasn't that. I could tell the difference between my eyes are weird and there is no light. I reached out, hands shaking, and fumbled for the curtain. My fingers found it, and I yanked it aside so hard it scraped across the rod as it fell. I stepped out of the tub, dripping, nearly slipping again because I was moving too fast. I felt around for the towel like a blind person, my hands hitting the counter, knocking something small over. I didn't care. I just needed light. I found the switch and flipped it up. The bathroom flooded with brightness so suddenly it made my eyes sting. Everything looked normal again except for the shower rod lying at an angle and my own reflection in the mirror looking pale and frightened. I grabbed my towel and wrapped it around myself with shaking hands. I didn't even look at the shower again. I didn't turn the water off carefully or straighten the curtain. I just reached in, twisted the faucet off, and backed away like I expected something to grab my wrist. I ran out of the bathroom. I didn't grab my clean clothes. I didn't grab anything. I sprinted down the hallway to my room, locking the door behind me even though I knew it wouldn't stop anything if something was really in the house. That's just what you do when you're scared. You try to put barriers between you and the feeling. I sat on the edge of my bed, still wrapped in the towel, water dripping onto the carpet. My hair was still wet and full of shampoo residue because I hadn't rinsed properly. I kept blinking hard, like that would reset my brain, like the images and the screen and the impact could be erased if I just tried hard enough. I told myself it was the steam. That was the only explanation I could find that sounded even slightly reasonable. Steam could loosen the pressure on the rod. Heat could make it expand or slip. Maybe it had been on the edge of falling for months, and today was just the day, but the timing didn't feel like an accident. It felt immediate, like the second I asked the question, something answered in the only way it could. And then, sitting there, I remembered something so simple that it made the fear spike all over again. I never turned the bathroom lights off. I had planned to. I had meant to. But I was so focused on getting into the shower, so focused on closing my eyes and repeating the phrase, that I skipped a step without even noticing. I could see it clearly in my head. I walked into the bathroom. I brought my towel and clothes. I stepped into the shower and I closed my eyes. I did not flip the switch. I know that because turning off the lights is a moment you notice. It changes the room. It's a choice you feel in your body. The bathroom light in our house was bright and harsh, and the switch made a loud click. If I had turned it off, I would remember the click and the sudden darkness before I closed my eyes. But I don't remember that because it didn't happen. So how did it end up pitch black when the rod fell? I tried to argue with myself. Maybe the bulb burned out right then. Maybe the power flickered. Maybe my eyes were so overwhelmed that I thought it was darker than it was. But those excuses fell apart as soon as I touched them. If the bulb had burned out, the light wouldn't have come back on instantly when I flipped the switch. If the power had flickered, other things in the house would have reset, and I would have noticed. And even if my eyes were confused, I would have seen some light from the hallway or from the little gaps around the door. There was nothing. It was like someone had wrapped the whole bathroom in a blanket. The thought that settled into me was the one I didn't want. Something turned the lights off for me, and if something turned them off, it meant I wasn't alone in that bathroom, even before the rod fell, even before the scream, even before the dark image formed behind my eyelids. I sat there for a long time, listening to the house. Every little sound felt loaded, a pipe settling, a faint tick from the air vent, the refrigerator humming down the hall. I kept expecting to hear a footstep, a shuffle, a wet drip moving across the floor toward my bedroom door. Eventually, I got dressed, hands still shaky, and tried to act like it was over, like I could return to being a normal kid on a normal afternoon. I turned on the TV in my room just for noise. I left the lights on. I told myself I'd been stupid and scared myself. But the ritual had more rules, and rules create their own kind of fear. The videos had said you were supposed to go straight to sleep afterward. I didn't do that. I ran to my room and sat there wide awake in the middle of the day. I didn't even know if that mattered, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if doing it wrong was worse? What if the parts I skipped meant I didn't finish it properly? That night when my family came home, I acted normal. I laughed at dinner. I talked about school. I pretended I didn't have a bruise forming on the top of my head. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done because even at 12, I knew how it would sound. They'd take away my internet, first of all. And second, they'd tell me it wasn't real, which would have made me feel both embarrassed and still afraid. When it was time for bed, I left the light on for as long as I could. Eventually, I turned it off because I didn't want anyone to come in and ask why. In the dark, I lay there staring at nothing, feeling my pulse in my ears. I kept thinking about the second part of the ritual, the part that was supposed to start the next day. The idea was that she follows you, that she's behind you, getting closer if you don't notice. That it becomes a game where you have to catch the moment she's near and say the phrase that stops her. I didn't know the phrase. Every video said it a little differently. Some people claimed it was Tom Air, some said it was something else, and half the comments argued about it like they were debating a movie quote. At the time, I didn't write it down. I didn't prepare, I just jumped in like an idiot because I assumed it would be fine. And at the end of the day, you were supposed to say, "I cut you loose." I never said that. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't whisper it. I didn't even think to say it as a joke. After what happened in the bathroom, I wanted to pretend none of it existed. Saying anything felt like admitting it was real. The next day, I tried to watch for signs, but the truth is, I didn't know what I was watching for. I kept glancing over my shoulder in the hallway at school. I kept looking at reflections in windows. I stood in line at lunch and felt like the space behind me was too tight, like someone was standing too close. Whenever I felt that, I would shuffle forward, trying to create distance without making it obvious. My skin would prickle, and I'd get that cold feeling at the base of my neck, the one that makes you want to turn around fast. But every time I did turn, there was nothing there, just other kids, lockers, normal life. That's what makes this hard to explain. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No ghost appeared in front of me. No voice called my name from a dark room. If something attached itself to me, it was quiet, subtle, the kind of thing you can't prove. And that's almost worse, because it leaves you stuck arguing with yourself. Over time, the fear settled into something else. A habit, almost. I would be walking somewhere and suddenly feel like I was being followed, even in broad daylight. I would catch myself stepping a little faster, like I was trying to stay ahead of something I couldn't see. Sometimes I would stop and pretend to check my phone, just so I could look around without it seeming weird. It's easy to say it was anxiety, that I scared myself and trained my brain to expect something behind me. That might be true. I'm not ruling it out. But the part I can't get past is that moment in the shower. The moment where my eyes opened and the bathroom was dark even though I never turned the light off. I still think about it. I still replay it like if I examine it enough times I'll find a normal answer hidden somewhere. A loose switch, a power dip, a memory mistake. But I don't believe my memory is wrong about that detail. It's burned in too sharply. I know what it felt like to stand there dripping wet, stunned, with the rod on the tub floor and darkness pressed against my eyes. I don't know if I finished the ritual correctly. I don't know if it even matters after you start something like that. I don't know if the rules are real or if they're just a story people tell to make the fear feel organized. All I know is that I never said, "I cut you loose." And sometimes, even now, years later, I'll be alone in a room and get this sudden, undeniable feeling that someone is standing just behind me, close enough that if I turned around too fast, I'd bump into them. When that happens, I don't turn around right away. I don't know why. Maybe I'm still 12 in that moment, back in that shower, eyes shut, repeating the phrase like a chant, pretending I'm in control. Daruma-san fell down. Daruma-san fell down. And waiting for the answer to reach out of the dark.